Hey everyone, welcome back to K-Korner, the channel where we dive into the wild world of entitled people and their unbelievable stories. Hope you enjoy it, and without further ado, let's go. This happened several years ago, around 2017. I had left college the year before and already had a job in a small family-owned restaurant and was looking for a second job, so that my roommate and I could save up to get our own apartment. We were living with her family at the time, and Rumi was also searching for a job. She was having a harder time of it, due to multiple leg injuries, as well as other health complications. But eventually, we found a restaurant that was getting ready to open, and it was on the same street as my current job. I picked up 2 applications on my way into work one morning, and turned in the filled applications the next day. On my day off, we went in for our interviews, and at the start, the manager said, "This is really just a formality. I'm going to hire you both anyway." And we both thought that was a good sign. The new restaurant was going to be a 24-hour diner, similar to Denny's and Waffle House. The lady who gave our interviews used to be a Waffle House manager, but it was 50s themed, and it was across the street from several bars. As the interior of the restaurant was still under construction, no one outside of management and construction crew could be in the restaurant for the next few weeks, and the management told us that they would text us when it was time to start training. Yeah, make that about 2 months before we hear about any sort of training. Already not a good sign. Once training started, it became clear that these people had no clue what the heck they all needed to do. You know how a restaurant is on kitchen nightmares before Gordon Ramsay comes and does an overhaul. Yeah, pick one of the worst restaurants, and you're getting close to the nonsense this place pulled. Can't take any breaks no matter how long your shift is, can't be seen rehydrating in front of customers, and don't get me started on what we found in some of the food. One thing I also forgot to mention earlier, this was a 2-story restaurant. Remember those multiple leg injuries that my roommate has that I mentioned earlier? She made sure that the management knew about it, and they said each time that they wouldn't put her upstairs. That night of the soft opening, it was clear that they had lied, because they put her upstairs, meaning that she would have to go up and down the stairs to get the food for her tables multiple times a night with a bad leg. And when she asked to switch sections with another girl, the managers told her to get over it. One of the other waitresses was the manager's niece, and major favoritism was given to her. This girl had no clue what the heck that she needed to do. She kept dropping everything, took forever to key orders in the computer system, and couldn't even mix a basic vanilla milkshake. On the soft opening night, the niece and my roommate were in similar sections, and my roommate would often help out the niece with figuring out the system. Slightly in the niece's defense, this system was a witch and would repeatedly crash multiple times a day. Well, guess who went to her auntie and said that my roommate had shoved her off of the computers and was stealing her customers. After the soft opening, the managers just seemed to be itching for a reason to fire me and my roommate, but they couldn't because neither of us had any write-ups, and any bullying accusations that the niece tried to pin on us were quickly disproved by other waitresses. And then the restaurant started opening for real. July 13th, 2017 was when the pot boiled over. This was one of my days off, but Rumi had to work that night. My aunt and uncle from Minnesota were in town that night, and my parents called me and offered to all go to dinner that night at the diner to help support my roommate. Well, the kitchen screws up again, and it's so bad that my uncle asks to speak to the manager. He was very open to my family about what his complaint was. The kitchen had royally screwed up the Reuben sandwich that he had ordered. But the manager told Rumi that my uncle's complaint was about her service. I stayed behind since I was her ride, and Fam left. She was in a section downstairs this time. About half an hour after Fam leaves, I had a milkshake on hold and looked around the restaurant and realized that I didn't see Rumi. I had seen her a little bit ago leaning against the wall and figured her leg was bothering her, but I don't see her anymore. So I started looking for someone to ask them for that milkshake. Almost as soon as I realize this, I see her coming down the stairs. She doesn't look towards me, but instead goes behind the milkshake bar, and I hear her politely ask for one of the other waitresses to let her by so that she can get her backpack. As soon as I heard that, my heart dropped. I knew exactly what had happened, why she had been upstairs. That's where the office was. I packed up when I saw her go into the restroom, and she came out in her street clothes. We had uniforms at this diner. I was ready to go, and one of the hosts came over to us asking if we were okay. She brushes by him and exits the building, and I simply tell him to cancel the milkshake and follow Rumi out of the restaurant. He follows us, asking if everything's okay, and Rumi turns around and exclaims, "They fired me because I leaned against the wall for 45 seconds. Oh hell no." I ask her to wait for me and go back into the building. Fortunately for me, one of the managers is already downstairs, and I call to her to get her attention. Thanks to theater, I know how to project my voice, and I make sure that the whole building can hear me when I tell her, "Because you fired my roommate over an injury that she made sure you were aware of, you can consider my employment terminated as well." Come to find out the whole story from Rumi later. Managers had been creating false write-ups for her, and false complaints, like my uncle's, and all sorts of other nonsense like the fake bullying charges, to use as an excuse to get rid of her. And now comes the part that you've been waiting for. The revenge. See, Rumi's family knows some people who are pretty high up in the city-state, such as the city sheriff, and one of the senators of our state. So, one of her family members got her a meeting with said senator, and she told him everything that this diner had done. He gave her the contact information to both the labor board, as well as a little company called OSHA. Don't know if you've heard of them. While she got in contact with them, I started a hashtag on Facebook, spreading the story, and asking my friends to do the same. Whenever she and I were in town together and were having conversations with the locals, any time that the conversation turned to good restaurants in the area, we made sure to warn them about the treatment that they gave to their staff, and asked them to spread their story. It got to the point where Rumi even overheard other people, even lawyers, talking about it on the streets, and in the coffee shop that she stayed in while waiting for me to get off of work. My boss at my primary job knew everything that was going on at this diner. Having heard both me and Rumi express our concerns and frustrations, and once we were no longer working there, she and the rest of her staff joined us in cracking jokes and throwing major shade at this diner. I still remember fondly to this day her saying that the drunks are the only reason that place is staying open. Even some of my co-workers were lurking for dirt on this diner, and on November 13th, 2017, literally, 4 months to the day that they pulled that nonsense, the cook at my job asked me, "So, did you hear that the diner's closed now?" Wait, what? I had to pull out my phone and check. Sure enough, there it was in the local news. The diner was closing their doors, effective immediately. The excuse that they gave was management change, and that it was only temporary. But to this day, the space that the diner had occupied is still boarded up. Rumi and I went out for celebratory milkshakes that night. We didn't expect that the whole place would be closed down, but we do not regret making those calls or Facebook posts. Buckle up, this one's long. I was visiting a friend who owns and operates a trailer park. Basically, his house is the main office. A couple had just moved into a lot with their mobile home. The boyfriend seemed fine, and he and his girlfriend had just had their first kid. Well, at 3 a.m., just a few hours after I arrived, the boyfriend showed up at my friend's house, the main office. Apparently, he had a DNA test done, and found out the kid wasn't his. So, while the girlfriend was still in the hospital, he started fooling around on her to get back at her. Earlier that day, she got released from the hospital, and he refused to go pick her up. So, she walked from the hospital to the trailer park, easily 20 miles, and found him with another girl. She went ballistic. She started trashing their tiny mobile home, while he and his mistress quickly got their clothes on, and the boyfriend opted to drive the mistress back to her place. When he got back, his soon-to-be ex-girlfriend had locked him out of their mobile home. So, at 3 a.m., he showed up at the front office to call the police. My buddy woke me up, filled me in on the situation, and I went out to his living room to keep the guy company. I explained that if the kid isn't his, and he signed the birth certificate. He has 60 days to remove himself from the birth certificate. Otherwise, he'll be on the hook for child support. I also explained that while calling the cops was a good idea, they likely wouldn't be able to remove her from the mobile home since she had established residency. The cops showed up, knocked on the door, and she answered. The cops just did a welfare check on the kid. They left, and she allowed him back into the mobile home. It would have been nice if that were the end, but nope, not even close. Not even 30 minutes after the cops left, the guy came back up to the main office and said he needed to call the cops again. She stole his car. From what he said, she even tried to run him over before she sped off into the night. Before the cops could get back to the park, she came back and started doing donuts in my buddy's yard. She ran over his garden and just messed up his yard. She finally stopped about a minute before the police arrived. The cops got out of their cruisers and arrested her on the spot. The charge? Misdemeanor malicious mischief. They charged her for ruining my buddy's garden, and that was it. A day passed, and the crazy lady got released on bond. She came back to their mobile home and got right back into it with her soon-to-be ex. During the fight, she started scratching at her throat until she left a lasting mark. She called the cops, claimed he laid hands on her, and the cops came and arrested him for domestic violence. The cops took the kid and placed him in protective custody. As an aside, I know she fabricated the "he beat me" story because she bragged about it after the cops left. She even went so far as to call the guy's parents and brag about getting their son locked up. Now my buddy is freaking out. He's got a crazy lady on his property. She has no income, and she just had their only source of income locked up and subsequently fired for being locked up. There's no way they're going to pay rent anytime soon. He wants her gone, but legally, he has no recourse because they aren't past due on rent. Another day passed. The guy was still locked up, and the crazy lady had started throwing all their belongings into the yard of their lot, and partially onto my buddy's property. My buddy told her she needed to clean up her yard by 6 p.m. or he would write up a violation. She ignored him. An hour or so after that, I was helping my buddy move some stacks of bricks in his backyard, which was right next to the lot her boyfriend had rented, and the entire time she was just talking to herself. She wasn't talking to herself in a normal way. No, she was yelling random things like, minimum wage and they fired me, $10 an hour and they fired me, $35,000 a year and they fired me, mother lovers, or, I just want to enjoy my life in peace, but they won't let me, I'll hurt them. We decided it would be best not to acknowledge her at all. We stopped working and went back inside for some lunch. Then we saw the smoke. This crazy woman was piling up her own stuff and lit the pile on fire. On my buddy's property, not even on her own lot. My buddy called the cops, who arrived in record time along with the fire department. They arrived to find her with a lighter and a can of gasoline in her hands. She had the water running, and she tried to turn it off, but the cops stopped her. My buddy opted to turn the water off for her, so he went and turned the water off to her mobile home. She screamed her head off at my buddy for doing that, despite the cops telling him to go ahead and do it. The fire department put out the fire, and the cops put handcuffs on her and stuffed her into their cruiser. I thought to myself, finally this crazy woman is getting put away for arson. Nope, the fire marshal refused to come to investigate, so it couldn't be classified as arson. The cops wrote her a citation and released her. My buddy told the cops he wanted to press charges for trespassing, as she had started the fire on his property. The cops advised that they couldn't because they would need to show intent. She needed to know she was trespassing, in other words. Since there wasn't a clear marker indicating that she was, the cops couldn't arrest her for it. So my buddy told the cops where his property started, and asked if the cop would explain that to her, so that when she inevitably trespasses again, they would be able to arrest her. The cop agreed. He explained where her property ended, and that she was under no circumstances to step foot on my buddy's land. As the cops were leaving, she looked at me and my buddy and said, "You're lucky I don't bash your heads in with my baseball bat," followed quickly by, "I'm going to hurt you both." The cops had their windows rolled down, but they did nothing. They just left. An hour passed, and we saw the crazy woman standing in the middle of the street, stopping every car that passed. Finally, One of them pulled into the park, parked on my buddy's property, and let her use their cell to call the cops. Why was she calling the cops? She tried to get them to come to arrest my buddy for turning her water off on police orders. Since she was standing on my buddy's property to call the cops, he whipped out his phone and recorded her standing on his property. Then he called the cops himself. When the cops came, she was certainly surprised when they put her in handcuffs immediately. The cop who had responded before, the one who explained to her where her land ended, came over, watched the video my buddy recorded on his cell, and then explained that he would not be arresting her for trespassing. He was going to do an emergency order of detention. Basically, she was going to be forcibly taken to the closest hospital, where she would be evaluated briefly and then released. He explained that she would be back out before the day was done. My buddy didn't bother insisting that he wanted to press charges for trespassing. I wondered why, but after the cops left, he called her ex-boyfriend's parents, who, as luck would have it, had the only key to the mobile home. It was given to them by the police, as it was on their son when he was arrested for domestic violence. They came out, and they locked up the RV. My buddy then noticed a water leak coming from the valve. So he turned off the water to the entire park briefly, cut off the section of the pipe attached to the valve, and capped it off to stop the leak. Lastly, remember how he warned the crazy lady to clean up her yard, or she would get a violation? Well, she never cleaned up her yard. Instead, she threw just about everything that was in the RV into the yard. As it's written in the rental agreement, my buddy cleaned her yard. He took everything that was out in the yard, TV, mattress, microwave, etc., and he hauled it off to the dump. Then he wrote out a violation as well as a bill for having to clean her yard. Well, the crazy lady got out a few hours after she was taken in, and she called her ex-boyfriend's parents to try to get a ride. They promptly hung up on her and immediately called us. We had plans to grill out for dinner, and my buddy invited them over for dinner and a show. She arrived after the sun had set, and well after we had eaten dinner. We were sitting out on my buddy's patio, which had a very clear view of the mobile home. When the crazy lady saw us, she let us know how she really felt. She called us every name in the book. She hadn't gotten to the mobile home yet, and because it was dark, she couldn't even see that her yard had been cleaned. We sat there and took every name she could dish out, and we collectively laughed as we all knew what was about to happen. After she realized we were laughing at her, she hit us with a final, "Forget you," before storming off to the mobile home. As she got closer, she could see that her yard was barren. When she got to the door, she could see the notice attached. When she went to turn the door handle, it wouldn't budge. After a few moments of silence, it finally clicked in her head. She screamed out into the night, "Mother lovers!" She must have been thirsty after her long walk because she went to the water hose, only to find that it wasn't on. Then she went to turn on the water, only to find that it had been capped off, no valve in sight. My buddy yelled out to her, "Sorry, there was a water leak at the valve. It was park property, so I capped it off. I'll have it repaired within the next 2 weeks though." Coincidentally, 2 weeks was the earliest time he could start the eviction process. Edit. Just to clarify, because I didn't have enough space in the story to do so, my buddy did try to get the crazy lady help. Before she had her boyfriend locked up, he told us that she was definitely bipolar and possibly schizophrenic, but she wasn't on medication for either disorder. My buddy explained that to the cops every time they came out, but they told us they couldn't do anything about it. They said that they used to be able to, but not anymore. It was a messed up situation, to be sure, but there was nothing either of us could have done. He wanted her out of his hair, because the crazy lady clearly had no problem with fabricating evidence and stories to get other people arrested, so he did what he had to do to make that happen. Not going to lie though, my buddy definitely enjoyed doing what he had to do. Oh, and the boyfriend's parents were fine with the cleansing process. They told us he was going to move back in with them while he got back on his feet, and that the only things he owned were the mattress and the mobile home itself. The only thing of his that got tossed was the mattress. Hey there, So this story goes back to a summer when I was 15 and my little sister was 9. I was all about that hustle, mowing lawns and babysitting, to save up for a phone. Yeah, pretty big deal when you're a teen. Anyway, I'd been stashing away my hard-earned cash in this piggy bank in my room. You know, the one that looks like it's about to burst? One sunny day, after I finished my lawn mowing gig, I came home feeling pretty proud of my wallet's weight. I headed straight to my room to feed my piggy bank and bask in the glory of all those greens. But what do I find? My piggy bank empty and my little sis sitting on my bed with my money spread out in front of her. At first, I thought she was just being her curious self, maybe counting it to see how much I had saved up. I asked her what was up, and her response caught me off guard, to say the least. She scooped the money into her pocket, stood up, and announced, "Oh, I just need some money for the mall." Hold up, what? I was baffled. I mean, she was 9, and malls aren't exactly the place she'd be hanging out at, right? So I stepped in front of her, blocking her exit, and asked her how much she'd taken. "Oh, only 200. Don't worry," she said casually, like she had just borrowed a pencil. I was ready to lose it. I took that money right out of her pocket and basically yelled, "What do you mean only 200? That's all I've got. If you need money, just ask Mom or Dad." She spun around, and before I knew it, the waterworks started flowing, along with a chorus of "sharing is caring" and "what's mine is yours." Guess what? My parents heard the commotion and walked in, just in time for my sister to burst out that I wouldn't give her even a couple of dollars. What? I was the one seeing red now. My parents turned to me with raised eyebrows, and in no time I found myself in the middle of a heated argument. They were all for her, telling me to cut her some slack and hand over some cash. Can you believe it? I had to hand over $10 to my sister, and I was fuming. Like, seriously, it wasn't chump change. It was my hard-earned money that I planned to use for my dream phone. The unfairness of it all gnawed at me while I tried to scarf down my dinner that evening. But wait, there's more. Dinner was a pretty awkward affair that day, with me sulking and my sister acting all smug. She refused to come out of her room to eat, and my mom went in to check on her. And guess what she found? My sister sitting in my room, counting my money again. It was like déjà vu, but a lot worse. My sister tried to sneak the money into her pocket and make a run for it, but there was no escape this time. My mom was right there, giving her the "you're in trouble" look. My sister was cornered. Well, as you can imagine, things got intense. My sister was clinging to her entitled stance, claiming that it should be okay for her to take my money because who cares if she takes a little bit and sharing is caring. Seriously, the audacity of this kid. My mom finally had to intervene and take back the money. She even handed me back my precious $10, which felt like a small victory at that point. Now, I've got to give my sister some credit. She didn't back down entirely. She did try to swipe my money a couple more times, but after the epic fail, it seemed like even she got the message. If she wanted something, she'd have to ask Mom and Dad, not just help herself to my stash. So that's the tale of my entitled sister versus my hard-earned money. I can't believe how worked up she got over my money, acting like it should belong to her just because she's my sister. I learned a lot from that whole ordeal, like how to stand my ground, and that sometimes even parents can get swayed by a few tears and a sob story. In the end, well, I guess it's that sharing might be caring, but it doesn't mean raiding your sibling's piggy bank. And honestly, that summer taught me way more about family dynamics than I ever thought it would. I work as a security supervisor for a property management company. Yesterday, I had to cover for an associate who booked off at the last minute. The building I was at is a high-end condominium. This is one of the sites under my area, so I had to handle the duties until dispatch could find someone to fill the shift for the rest of the night. I got there at around 3 p.m. and was expecting to be out by 6. Due to the ongoing virus, a lot of condominiums have their amenities like the gym, pool, games rooms, and screening rooms closed. It costs too much to sanitize these areas every hour, and it's hard to limit the number of people in at once. So in comes a real estate agent to show a few units that are up for sale. A potential buyer is following closely. They both go to the units that are for sale, spending a considerable amount of time in each. I see them through the cameras in one of the elevators, trying to press the floor where all the amenities are. No luck, since it's locked down to everyone. After trying for a few minutes, they give up and return to the main floor. Now I'm expecting that the viewing is done, and they are going to leave. Wrong. The agent walks up to me. Agent, unlock that floor. Me, excuse me? Agent, unlock that floor now. Me. I'm sorry, but the amenities are locked down, and no one is allowed on that floor. Agent, I don't care. Unlock it now or I'll go to a random floor, take the stairs to the amenities floor, break the lock and enter. Me. Sir, doing that will be considered trespassing, and I will have to call the police. I can't physically throw you out without losing my job. Client, go ahead and call the cops. Not even 5 seconds after he said it, I dialed 911. I explained to the operator that I was being verbally abused, threatened, and the people doing so were just about to damage property while trying to trespass into a locked-down part of the building. Approximately 5 minutes after I hung up on the operator, 2 officers walked in. They talked to me first since I placed the call. I told them everything that had happened up until their arrival. The other officer then talked to the agent and the client, who told them that it was me who threatened them and was being racist. Me. Officer, I have video footage of the last 20 minutes, including audio. Officer, please show us. I pulled up all the video footage and showed it to the cops. One of the officers smiled while watching the footage, and I also had a grin. Officer, to the agent, may I see your broker license, please? The agent reluctantly handed over his license. The officer clicked pictures of it, got his information, and told him that this footage and report would be sent to the real estate board in our city. Then he turned to the client. Officer, you should not buy the condo in this building. Client, why not? Officer, because you are banned from this property and will not be able to return. All I did was call the police, like the client asked. The real estate agent's face turned red with anger and embarrassment. He tried to protest, but the officer cut him off. Officer, sir, I suggest you leave now before we escalate this further. You've already caused enough trouble. The agent and the client left the building, grumbling under their breath. I watched them go, feeling a mix of satisfaction and relief. I knew I had done the right thing by standing my ground and calling the police. As I went back to my desk, my phone buzzed with a message from my boss. Boss, heard what happened. Good job handling the situation. We'll discuss this further tomorrow. I smiled, feeling a sense of pride. It wasn't the first time I'd dealt with entitled people, and it certainly wouldn't be the last, but knowing that I had the support of my boss and the police made it all worth it. The rest of my shift went by without any more incidents. By the time 6 p.m. rolled around, I was ready to go home and unwind. I packed up my things and headed out, feeling a sense of accomplishment. As I walked to my car, I thought about the agent and the client. I couldn't understand why some people felt so entitled and thought they could bully their way into getting what they wanted. It was frustrating, but it also made me more determined to stand up for what's right. The next day, I went into the office for my meeting with the boss. Boss, you've handled everything perfectly. We reviewed the footage and the report from the police. You're getting a commendation for your actions. Me, thank you. I just did what I thought was right. Boss, and that's exactly why you're getting recognized. Keep up the good work. I left the meeting feeling even more confident. It was good to know that my efforts were appreciated and that I had made a difference. Later that week, I heard from a colleague that the real estate agent had his license suspended pending an investigation. The client was also facing charges for his actions. It was a reminder that no matter how entitled some people might be, they weren't above the law. Looking back on the incident, I realized that standing up to entitled people wasn't just about protecting property or enforcing rules. It was about maintaining respect and integrity, both for myself and for the community I served. And that was something I would always be proud of. Back in 2002, I was working a weekend gig at a carnival. It was a lively outdoor festival with all sorts of rides and attractions. My job that day was to manage the large inflatable slide. The slide had steps going up on the right side and the actual slide on the left, ending with a pad at the bottom. My main duty was to keep the line moving smoothly and ensure there were no injuries. When a kid was at the top, I'd send the next one up. This way, the child at the bottom would have enough time to move off the landing zone before the next one came down. Everything was running fine until Karen showed up. You know the type, entitled, loud, and always right. Her child, who looked about 7, followed my instructions well and climbed to the top of the slide. When he reached the bottom, he started jumping up and down on the pad. I didn't mind at first, since he had a few seconds before the next child reached the top. I kindly asked him to come down. Me, "Hey buddy, could you come down please?" He started to make his way over, until Karen intervened. "Karen, you can keep jumping, sweetie, you're not hurting anything." I gave it a few more seconds, but the next child was ready to come down, so I asked Karen to please remove her child. Me, "Ma'am, could you please ask your son to come down, it's for his safety." Karen, borderline yelling, "He's not hurting anything, let him have fun." At this point, I had to tell the child at the top to wait. Me, "Please wait a moment." I turned back to Karen and tried to explain. Me, "Ma'am, it's for his protection and it's holding up the line." Karen, "He's fine, just send the next kid down." The situation was escalating, and other parents started to complain and shout. The line was getting longer and people were getting impatient. Karen kept arguing, insisting her son was fine. I was stuck between a rock and a hard place. Finally, she yelled at me to just send the next kid down, promising she would get her son off the pad. Karen, "Just send the next kid, he'll be fine and I'll get him down." Cue the moment of karmic justice. The child who had been waiting patiently at the top was significantly larger and was wearing jogging pants and socks. As soon as I signaled for him to come down, he jumped straight up and hit the slide with maximum velocity. Pretty sure he set a high-speed record, because by the time he hit the landing zone, he skidded across the top and collided with Karen's child. The impact sent Karen's son flying about 10 feet onto the pavement. Karen's face went pale, and she rushed to pick up her screaming child. She didn't say a word, and neither did I just stared at her while she gathered her son and left in a hurry. The other parents watched, and a few even muttered in satisfaction. As I resumed my job, I couldn't help but feel a bit bad for the kid. He didn't deserve to get hurt because of his mother's stubbornness. But at the same time, I hoped Karen learned a valuable lesson about listening to instructions meant for her child's safety. The rest of the day went by without any more incidents. Kids slid down, got off the pad, and everything ran smoothly again. I even got a few nods of approval from other parents, which felt good. At the end of my shift, I reflected on the incident. Working at a carnival had its ups and downs, but dealing with entitled people like Karen was always a challenge. Hopefully, next time she'll think twice before ignoring safety rules. Looking back, I realized that standing up to entitled people isn't just about enforcing rules. It's about protecting everyone involved. And sometimes, life has a way of teaching lessons better than any words ever could. A couple of months ago, I went to grab some pizza from a well-known chain. I had ordered ahead, which turned out to be a smart move because the place was insanely busy. The entire parking lot was full except for one spot right by the entrance. Strangely, a few teenagers were sitting in the parking spot. Not in a car, just sitting there, taking up the space. I figured they would move when I pulled up, but they didn't. I also thought they would move if I started to pull into the spot, but they didn't. So I pulled in as slowly as possible, making sure not to hit them but still getting my car into the spot. As I got out, they gave me dirty looks but still stayed sitting right in front of my car. I have to mention, my car has a very shrill and loud horn. It's particularly ear-piercing if you're right in front of the car. It's incredibly annoying. Annoyed myself, I came up with a plan for revenge before I even got out of my car. As I went inside, I did what any responsible car owner would do. I locked my car so the horn would go off, twice. Let me take you through the story step by step. I was looking forward to a quiet evening with a hot pizza and maybe a movie. When I pulled into the parking lot of the pizza place, I was surprised to see it was packed. Every spot was taken, except for one right by the entrance. But instead of a car, there were a few teenagers just sitting there, hanging out. Me, seriously, why are they sitting there? I muttered to myself as I pulled up. I thought they'd move once they saw my car, but they didn't budge. I figured maybe they didn't notice me, so I started to slowly pull into the spot, hoping they'd get the hint. They didn't. They just sat there, looking at me with an expression that screamed, "What do you think you're doing?" Teen 1, "What are you doing?" Me, "Parking. This is a parking spot, not a bench." Teen 2, "We were sitting here first." Me, "And it's a parking spot, for cars." They just rolled their eyes at me. I was beyond annoyed at this point, but I didn't want to escalate things. So I continued to park as slowly and carefully as possible, making sure not to hit them. They gave me dirty looks the entire time but didn't move an inch. As I got out of the car, I looked down at them. Me, "You know, you're not supposed to sit in parking spots, right?" Teen 3, "Whatever, old man." I couldn't help but chuckle at that. Old man, I'm only in my 20s. But whatever, they were just being typical teenagers. I walked into the pizza place, feeling a bit irritated. The place was packed, and I was glad I had ordered ahead. As I waited for my pizza, I thought about the teenagers outside. I knew I couldn't let this slide. They needed to learn a lesson, and I had just the idea. When my pizza was finally ready, I made sure to lock my car from the inside of the restaurant, setting off the horn twice. It was loud, very loud. I saw a few heads turn, and through the window I saw the teenagers jump up in surprise. They looked around, bewildered, and then glared at my car. Teen 1, "What the hell was that?" Teen 2, "Man, that scared the crap out of me." I couldn't help but smirk as I walked back to my car. As I approached, the teenagers were no longer sitting in the parking spot. Instead, they were standing to the side, looking annoyed and a bit embarrassed. Teen 3, "Was that really necessary?" Me, "Maybe next time you'll think twice about sitting in a parking spot." Teen 2, "Whatever, man, you're such a jerk." Me, "And you're the ones who decided to sit in a parking spot." I got into my car, put the pizza on the passenger seat, and drove off, feeling a sense of petty satisfaction. As I left the parking lot, I could see the teenagers still standing there, probably deciding whether to go back to sitting in the spot or not. I hoped they wouldn't for their own sake. This whole experience was a reminder of how some people just need a little nudge to understand basic etiquette. It's not like I was asking for much, just to use the parking spot for what it was meant for. In the end, I got my pizza, and they got a lesson in not being a nuisance. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more captivating stories. Share your own experiences and opinions in the comments below, and let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, stay tuned for more epic tales.